Okay, let me ask you something. Have you ever spent a whole weekend just cramming for a big exam, only to feel like you've forgotten pretty much everything a week later? Yeah, you're definitely not alone. Today, we're going to dive into the cognitive science behind what actually works for learning. And here's a spoiler, it's not about studying harder, it's about studying a whole lot smarter. So, why does this happen? Right? We put in the hours, we read the chapters, we highlight the pages until they're practically glowing neon yellow, but the information just doesn't stick. It is one of the most frustrating things about learning, and it really points to this massive gap between what we think works and what our brains actually need to build real, lasting knowledge. And the heart of the problem is right here. It's this battle between passive and active study techniques. You see, passive techniques, things like rereading or just kind of watching a lecture without taking notes, they feel super easy and really productive, but they create what scientists call the illusion of learning. Active strategies, on the other hand, well, they feel hard. They require you to actually grapple with material. And that effort, that's precisely what makes the learning stick. All right, let's talk about the biggest culprits first. Highlighting and rereading. They're probably the most common study habits on the entire planet. And we do them because they make us feel like we're getting something done, right? The page looks different, the words start to look familiar, but that familiarity is so dangerous. It tricks our brains into thinking we've learned the material, when all we've really done is recognize it. And if you don't believe me, here's the cold, hard data. Study after study shows that just highlighting or rereading a text leads to, wait for it, virtually 0% improvement in long-term recall. Zero. All that time you spent with that marker could have been used on strategies that actually, work. It's a tough pill to swallow, for sure, but getting this is the first step to changing how we learn. So if all those common habits are basically useless, what does work? Well, we need a better system. I want you to think of something called self-regulated learning, or SRL, as the operating system for your brain. It's not one single technique. It's a whole framework for how you approach, manage, and adapt to any learning task you ever face. And this SRL cycle has 4 simple but really powerful phases. First, you have to understand the task. What are you actually supposed to learn and why? Second, you set goals and plan your attack. Third, and this is the big one, you enact your strategy. This is where the active work happens. And finally, you adapt. You're constantly checking in, seeing what's working, what isn't, and you adjust your plan as you go. Okay, so let's zoom in on that enact phase, because that's where the magic is. Inside that phase, there are 3 key cognitive processes that you absolutely need to master. Think of these as your active learning toolkit. Instead of just grabbing random techniques, we're going to focus on the fundamental processes that drive real comprehension and memory. The very first process, and honestly the one most of us skip, is activating your prior knowledge. Before you even start reading a new chapter or watching a lecture, you have to intentionally stop and ask yourself, okay, what do I already know about this topic? It seems so simple, but I promise you it is a total game changer. This analogy just explains it perfectly. Imagine trying to build a 1,000-piece puzzle with no picture on the box to guide you. It would be completely overwhelming, maybe even impossible. Well, activating what you already know is like looking at that picture on the box. It gives you a framework, some context, so all the new pieces of information actually have a place to go. And doing this has 3 huge benefits. First, it directs your attention to what's actually important. Second, it makes your brain's processing way more efficient because you're already anticipating some of the ideas. And third, it helps you cope with really complex information because you're giving it a structure from the get-go, instead of it just being a random list of facts.
Okay, process number 2 is to organize information. Now, think about it. Most of the stuff we learn is presented to us in a straight line, one page after another, one slide after another. But knowledge isn't linear. It's this big, interconnected web. Your job as a learner isn't just to passively consume that line of text. It's to find the hidden structure inside of it.
So how do you actually do that? Easy. You match your strategy to the way the information is structured. If the text is comparing and contrasting 2 different theories, don't just write a bunch of linear notes. Make a 2-column table. If it's describing a cause and effect chain, draw a flowchart. It's this act of reorganizing that forces your brain to build those strong connections. And that brings us to the third and final process. This is where the really deep learning happens, constructing meaning. This is all about going beyond just repeating facts back. It's about generating connections between ideas, asking yourself questions, and really making the information your own. This is the difference between just memorizing something and truly understanding it.
And you can see the difference right here. Weak, passive notes, they're basically just a transcript of what the professor said. Everything seems equally important. But good, active notes, they're a record of what you are thinking about the material. They prioritize the big ideas, they document your questions, and they reorganize everything into a structure that actually makes sense to you.
Now, at this point, you might still be a little skeptical. I get it. Rereading feels so productive, doesn't it? Well, let's look at a classic study that put that feeling to the test and directly compared passive rereading to an active learning strategy.
So the researchers, Roediger and Karpik, they asked a simple question. They had students study a passage. One group just reread it over and over. The other group read it once, then put it away and tried to recall and write down everything they could remember, which is a form of practice testing. So which group do you think did better on the final test a week later?
The results? They weren't even close. The group that did the active recall, the practice testing, performed way, way better on the final test. That act of struggling to pull the information out of your own memory is what strengthens the connections in your brain and makes the learning last.
But wait, here comes the twist. And honestly, this is the most important part of this whole thing. When the students were asked to predict how well they would do, the results were completely flipped. The rereading group, the ones who actually performed the worst, were the most confident in their learning. And the active recall group, our top performers, were the least confident.
And folks, this is the rereading trap. Passive strategies feel easy, and they build this false sense of confidence because the material just feels familiar. But active strategies, like trying to recall information, feel difficult and uncertain because they immediately show you the gaps in your knowledge. But that feeling of difficulty, that feeling of struggle, that's the feeling of actual learning happening. So what is the big, giant takeaway from all of this? It's that learning is not a passive act where you just consume information like you're watching a movie. It's an active process of construction. It's not about finding the one perfect note-taking technique that will solve all your problems. Ultimately, this is the thing that matters most. It doesn't matter if you use Cornell notes or mind maps or flowcharts or some other system. What matters is whether the technique you're using forces you to engage in those three core processes: activating what you already know, organizing the new information, and constructing your own meaning from it. That's the real secret.
So I'll leave you with one final question. Knowing what you know now about this illusion of learning, about the power of active engagement, what is one passive study habit you are going to replace with an active one this week? Because the next time you sit down to learn something, I want you to remember that feeling of effort, it isn't a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that you're actually succeeding.